Chapter 76. He's my boyfriend. Senior brother Lawrence, come with me, I'll give you the items you need, Phoebe said to Lawrence, seemingly a bit bored after Han Shao made no response to the round of sarcasm directed towards him. Han Shao only drank mouthful after mouthful of water with a wry face. Before she left, Phoebe's clear eyes glared viciously at Han Shao as her body halted. If you're not in a hurry, wait for a while. Han Shao lifted his head to look at Phoebe, clearly perceiving her repressed anger. Remember that the materials for his Demon Slayer edge were still in her hands. He immediately nodded out of resignation. Phoebe led Lawrence off to the side. Fabian looked at Han Shao with an extremely odd look after they left, asking with surprise, Brian, to think that you're only an errand boy at the Babylon Academy of School of Magic. My gosh, but you're so strong. What's going on? Nothing much. Oh right, this Lawrence is part of the Warrior Academy at our academy, a very ordinary sergeant knight, but Miss Phoebe has the strength of a sword master. How could the two of them have the same master? Han Shao was quite perplexed as he asked Fabian. Although knights and swordsmen could train the same fighting aura, Lawrence was merely a sergeant knight, whereas Phoebe had the strength of a sword master while training underneath the same master. The gap between the two was simply too great, particularly when Han Shao had clearly heard from their mouths that Lawrence was the senior disciple brother and Phoebe was just the junior sister. This made Han Shao feel that it was even odder. I'm not too clear about the young miss situation either. I was just an insignificant character in the Boost Merchant Guild before. I'd only heard that the young miss was studying abroad before the guild master passed away and would only return once or twice each year. If it wasn't for the fact that the guild master suddenly passed away, Miss Phoebe likely wouldn't have suddenly stayed. Lawrence only appeared recently. Their relationship is indeed quite close, but I have no way of answering your questions either. Fabian looked apologetically at Han Shao as he explained. Han Shao didn't ask further after this explanation, but merely nodded and frowned in contemplation. After a while, Phoebe and Lawrence once again stood at the door. Phoebe looked at Fabian and instructed Fabian, show senior brother Lawrence out the door for me. I have a few words to speak to Mr. Brian in private. Yes, miss. Fabian stood up, knowing how to behave in a delicate situation, and walked outside. Brian, I'm very happy to see you here. If you'd like to earn a few more gold coins in the future, you can come find me at any time. However, I think you won't be needing that anymore. Alright, see you later, Brian. I think we'll have plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. Lawrence looked meaningfully at Han Shao, laughed lightly, and followed Fabian out. When the two had left, Phoebe walked in with a cold face and flicked a glance at Han Shao after sitting down, snorting lightly. How dare you come back here again? And why wouldn't I dare? Han Shao's eyebrow flicked, not taking anything, lying down as he stared back into Phoebe's eyes. I haven't done anything against my conscience, not to mention you still owe me from last time. As long as you give me the materials you promised and the black gold, or I'll leave immediately and won't come do business with you ever again. Phoebe slammed her hand down on the table and glared at Han Shao furiously. You, how dare you demand things from me? Damn it, you violated me and I've been nice enough not to kill you. Bullshit, both you and I were influenced by the aphrodisiac then. I was the one who dragged you out of the guild, otherwise you'd be long dead by now. Not to mention I didn't really do anything to you, otherwise I wouldn't have brought you to the river. Han Shao was truly angry now. He had toiled all night long and not only had he gained nothing, but he'd suffered a beating at her hands. This Phoebe wouldn't let go of this matter. Was she truly trying to avoid paying up? Phoebe drew out her longsword with a clang and glared wrathfully at Han Shao. Han Shao also abruptly slammed the table and immediately stood up, glaring ferociously at Phoebe, seeming to want to break into a fight as soon as the two disagreed. The two of them glared at each other and maintained this position for nearly a minute. Phoebe curled her lip and stuck her longsword back into the sheath with another clang. She turned her head, no longer looking at Han Shao, and said coldly, "Just what do you want?" "Very simple. I'll purchase the other materials according to the estimate you gave me and give me the black gold or that you owe me. Our debts will be resolved this way and we won't have anything to do with each other in the future. I won't conduct any more stupid transactions with you anymore." Han Shao sat down with a darkened face and drained the water from the glass in front of him with one gulp, saying decisively, "You dratted profit-seeking fucking jerk. Here, take it all and get out of here. Phoebe felt an involuntary surge of rage upon hearing Han Shao-Oh's words as uncontrollable anger showed in her expression. She withdrew a large bundle of items rather irritably from her space ring and slammed it down on the table, throwing it in front of Han Shao, leveling a harsh glare at Han Shao. "Hey, you prepared it all, why didn't you say so? We were harming our amiability for nothing." Han Shao had planned on taking the items and leaving, but saw that the bundle of items were packaged orderly. There was a piece of odd-looking art contained in a clear flask with the words black gold written on it. It looked like Phoebe had been long since prepared for his arrival and hadn't planned on going back on her word. But what Han Shao couldn't wrap his mind around was that since Phoebe hadn't planned on going back on her word, why did she come in with such an explosive temper and say that she hadn't planned on giving him anything? This was rather baffling, and Han Shao couldn't make any sense of it. "Give me your crystal card. I'll transfer the appropriate amount of gold coins into your card." Hey, I actually didn't have any other meaning and just wanted to take back what was owed to me." Han Shao smiled rather awkwardly but still put this bundle of items into his space ring, then talked to Phoebe somewhat abashed. Still not properly looking at Han Shao, Phoebe had a face of cold arrogance and said stiffly, "No need. I'm not as miserly as you. It's only 3,500 gold. Treat it as a gift. Don't let me see you in the future, just get out." Seeing that she was so sarcastic and jeering, Han Shao's face froze and he nodded, slapping down the piece of black iron ore that he had mined the day before. He too said coldly, "I don't like owing favors to strangers. Treat this ore as compensation of me purchasing your other ores. Goodbye, Miss Phoebe, I won't be doing business with you in the future." Just as Han Shao was about to resolutely leave the room, Phoebe suddenly lost her composure and stood up, looking at Han Shao with a lost expression. Her wise eyes were full of weakness and weariness. She spoke with a desolate voice, "You're going to treat me as a stranger from now on?" Shrugging, Han Shao said naturally and unconstrained, "Since you don't care to treat me as a friend, I of course will not shamelessly impose on you." Han Shao smiled nationally after these words and began to walk outside, but Phoebe suddenly called out lightly before he walked out the door, "Wait." Turning his head to look at Phoebe, Han Shao asked calmly, "Miss Phoebe, what other matters are there?" Phoebe's expression was a bit odd. She lowered her head and thought silently for a bit, but when she lifted her head, a good half of the weakness and weariness had actually vanished. Her direct stare at Han Shao made him feel very odd. She even quirked her lips at the end and revealed a trace of a smile, asking, "Brian, you mean that you already viewed me as a friend?" Astounded, Han Shao nodded and replied matter-of-factly, "Of course, we've gone through 2 life or death experiences in the Boost Merchant Guild, not to mention you've helped me on several occasions. I already consider you a friend, but you're not willing." "Who says I'm not willing, huh? Apart from monetary transactions, are you so heartless to all your friends?" Phoebe's expressions had returned to normal by now and had a few more traces of human interest compared to her normal remote aloofness, and she used the same attitude she had used towards Lawrence just now when talking to Han Shao. "Of course not," Han Shao responded. Han Shao could clearly feel that Phoebe's words had been permeated with sincerity and worry. He felt a bit touched inside and his facial expressions became more tender. After thinking carefully, Han Shao felt that Phoebe's words should be fine. He frowned and said to Phoebe, "Then what do you think I should do? Eliminate Grover with me, otherwise we will never have days of peace." Phoebe's charming face grew cold as she bit off her words. Musing for a bit, Han Shao suddenly felt that perhaps a life ensconced in danger was more suitable for him to break through. His life had been too simple and monotone before, perhaps additional stimulus would make it more interesting. Add to that what Phoebe had said, if the threat of Grover wasn't eliminated, he may truly be faced with endless troubles. After musing for a bit, Han Shao said resolutely, "All right, I promise you." "Then accompany me to the personal banquet held by the guild tonight. Several of the founding elders will be present at this banquet." Phoebe's charming face was gladdened upon seeing Han Shao agree, and she immediately opened her mouth in inquiry. A banquet held by your guild? What am I going to do there?" Han Shao started and asked. "Gain the goodwill of the other founding elders and take precautions against the schemes of that whole thing." "Brian, I need your help. You just said that we're friends, right?" Phoebe looked straight at Han Shao and asked. He suddenly had the feeling that he'd boarded a pirate ship and was about to be taken advantage of. Han Shao felt a bit odd, but he had indeed. admitted that the two were friends earlier according to Phoebe's intentions. He was unable to back down now and could only grit his teeth and agree. Exclaiming softly, Phoebe said happily, "Wonderful, wait a moment and I'll have someone tailor a tuxedo that fits you. I also need to teach you some basic noble courtesies. I've already learned from Lawrence that you're from the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. I think you're probably not too well versed in such things." Throwing an ill-tempered look at her, Han-Sha-Oh said, "I was an errand boy, but that was in the past. There's nothing untoward about it and nothing that can't be talked about." "Sorry Brian, I really didn't mean anything by it truly." Phoebe was a bit agitated and hastened to apologize with genuinity. "No worries, tell me, I'll listen carefully." Han-Sha-Oh waved his hand with indifference and indicated for Phoebe to begin. This is black iron ore." It was as if she'd just discovered it as Phoebe looked at the black iron ore that Han-Sha-Oh had set on the table. She looked at Han-Sha-Oh with astonishment. "You actually had black iron ore? It looks like you truly want to forge the best weapon." "Absolutely," Han-Sha-Oh responded firmly. Phoebe gave Han-Sha-Oh an overview of the basic courtesies of nobility. Han-Sha-Oh understood that in order to climb to a higher level in this world he must indeed have a grasp of such mannerisms. Therefore he docilely listened to Phoebe's descriptions and even tried to make a few of the basic gestures of courtesies according to Phoebe's demands. When night fell, Han-Sha-Oh had already changed into the tuxedo that Phoebe had specially prepared for him and actually cleaned up nicely. He followed behind Phoebe and rode in a carriage to arrive at the Boost Merchant Guild for the third time. Many luxurious and opulent carriages were parked in front of the doors and the guards had been changed out. They were two unfamiliar faces to Han-Sha-Oh. When Phoebe and Han-Sha-Oh both alighted from the carriage, they walked in with the ease of experience without having to greet the guards. Phoebe led the way past two hallways and appeared at the entrance of the banquet hall. "Niece Phoebe, this is a private banquet of our guild. It doesn't seem too appropriate that you've brought him." Grover's hand held a wine glass filled with fine wine at the front of the door and happened to be conversing delightfully with a couple obviously well-off guild elders. When he saw Phoebe and Han-Sha-Oh walk in, he first looked balefully at Han-Sha-Oh and then addressed Phoebe. "Uncle Grover, Mr. Brian isn't an outsider." Phoebe thinned her lips and laughed lightly, glancing at Han-Sha-Oh with some shyness as she explained. "Oh, then dear niece, can you tell me why he isn't an outsider?" Grover's eyes squinted as he sized up Han-Sha-Oh with venomous snake-like eyes, speaking sinisterly as he did so. "He's my boyfriend." Phoebe threw her head back, looking at Grover directly in the eyes without fear as she said proudly. Chapter 77, The Position of Guild Master. Grover was startled and had an exceedingly odd expression as he looked at Phoebe. His gaze at Han-Sha-Oh afterwards was even more odd and confirmed again, as if he didn't believe what he had just heard. "Is he really your boyfriend?" "Of course." Phoebe nodded affirmatively and stretched out her arm with a red face and held Han-Sha-Oh's left hand like she wanted to prove the relationship between the two. Han-Sha-Oh's mouth was open as if someone had shoved an egg into his mouth, an expression of dumbfoundedness appearing on his face. He didn't react until he felt Phoebe secretly apply pressure to his arm with her small hand, laughing dryly, and nodded without explaining anything. One of the guild elders, talking jovially with Grover, said doubtfully to Grover in a low voice, "What's this kid's background?" Grover didn't say much, only throwing a look at this person and turned his body to the side. He smiled. "Since he's your boyfriend, Phoebe, then there's no problem. Hurry and come on in." Dragging Han-Sha-Oh, Phoebe's facial expression was as usual as she walked into the hall. She greeted a few founding members with a smile and continued to drag Han-Sha-Oh to a place with fewer people. Waiters held platters filled with fruit and fine wine throughout the hall, placing them on square tables located in a spacious area. A large chandelier overhead sent bright light into every cranny of the room. The decorations that littered the entire hall were incredibly luxurious, giving a rustic countryman such as Han-Sha-Oh quite a shock. But what shocked Han-Sha-Oh the most was Phoebe's words just now. When he saw that there was no one around, he immediately smiled wryly at Phoebe. "Miss Phoebe, what did you mean to do by doing all of this?" Conveniently snatching a wine glass, Phoebe poured a glass of delicious red wine for herself, gracefully raising it to her lips for a light taste, finally speaking afterwards. "Don't think too much, I'm just finding a cover for your presence and don't mean anything else by it. If I didn't say such things, you probably wouldn't even be able to make it inside." Nodding, Han-Sha-Oh sighed resignedly and said, "I knew that nothing good would result from me following you here. You have to act more natural. I'll cover things for you. This is the annual gathering of the guild and all the founding elders will attend. As bold as Grover is, he wouldn't dare to make a move at this time, so we don't have to worry. Phoebe spoke softly to Han Shao as her eyes continuously scanned his surroundings. Also grabbing a wine glass to pour himself half a glass, Han Shao took a sip and found it tartly delicious. He observed his surroundings once more with keen interest, finding that many of the guild members had also brought their other halves. There were 20 or 30 people in the entire hall. There were some elderly members and some handsome youths. There were also some beautiful married women with a graceful bearing and a mirror of noble ladies. Without an exception, all of these people were dressed richly and their motions urbanely polite. It looked like this was the so-called style of the upper class. Grover held a wine glass in hand and threaded through all the people, amiably greeting everyone and looking quite friendly. The Boost Merchant Guild has always been controlled by the Boost family. My family had always been the guild master before, but because I was always traveling outside, that old thing temporarily took the position of guild master after my father passed away. But don't think that he has good relations with many of the elders. No one really knows what goes on in the dark, otherwise there'd be no point in me coming back. As Han Shao silently observed the surroundings, Phoebe gave her explanations in a low voice. When Phoebe was finished, a thought struck Han Shao as he suddenly asked, "How did your father die? Did you know nothing beforehand?" When he said this, a trace of killing intent instantly blossomed in Phoebe's eyes. She suppressed her voice and said with a cold expression, "I'm still investigating how my father died. I haven't found any evidence yet because I'm usually not in the guild and thus am not too certain of many things. The founding elders probably don't really trust my abilities and thus, their attitudes are all vague and indefinite. My current task at hand is to win over the support of the founding elders, otherwise I'll be unable to shake that old thing from his position with my power alone." Han Shao understood that Phoebe was also suspecting the reasons behind her father's death with these words. He didn't say much more and held his wine glass, observing those in the hall and privately considering a few things. A few more people entered after a while. An elder with grizzled sideburns walked in last into the hall with the support of a butler. When this person appeared, many people in the hall made their way over to make their greetings. Phoebe immediately pulled Han Shao in this direction as well when she saw him, quickly explaining in a low voice, "He's Andrew. He founded the Boost Merchant Guild along with my grandfather and is currently the founding elder with the longest record of service within the guild. Even Grover doesn't dare to act too wildly in front of him. We won't be as passive if he helps us." Arriving in front of Andrew, Phoebe made a restrained bow and said with a smile of joy on her face, "Grandpa Andrew, you've come as well. It's our beautiful little Phoebe. Grandpa hasn't seen you in quite a while. Hey, you've grown so tall." Andrew's left hand grasped his cane while his right hand was being supported by a butler as he chuckled at Phoebe. "Goodness, don't just stand around talking. Hurry and let the elderly sit down. When one is at that age, it must be very tiring to take a carriage the whole way here. He mustn't be kept standing," Grover said to Phoebe as he walked over in Andrew's direction, seeming to want to lead Andrew in a seat on his side. Hey, no worries. I'm having a delightful conversation with little Phoebe. I haven't seen our little Phoebe in quite a while." Andrew evaded Grover's support and actually raised his cane to walk in Han Shao and Phoebe's direction. Grover's brows involuntarily knit into a frown as he saw Phoebe lead Andrew to the other side with a look of surprise on her face. His gaze patrolled over Andrew's body, seeming to be contemplating something. When Phoebe, Andrew and Han Shao had all sat down in a corner on the other end of the hall, Phoebe and Andrew hadn't even had a chance to speak before Grover had raised a glass and said with a chuckle, "Founding elders of the Boost Merchant Guild, today is the annual gathering of our guild. It's a pleasure to see everyone again this year. It's a pity that because of health reasons my dear brother has passed away from an illness. This is quite a tragic event. Don't worry, Grover, everything is orderly under your management." I think if the guild master knew, he would be touched and gratified. One of the founding elders suddenly spoke up at this time, with two others by his side chiming in. Han Shao watched their performance with a cold eye, having a clear understanding of things in his heart. He knew that these people were sure to have close relations with Grover and were merely declaring their stance with these words. At this moment Han Sha-oh, seated next to Phoebe, could clearly hear Andrew snort in a very low tone. Phoebe was even closer to Andrew and naturally heard things clearly. She glanced involuntarily with surprise at Andrew and exchanged a look with Han Sha-oh. The guild master has already passed away, but our Boost Merchant Guild cannot be without a guild master forever. I think we should take advantage of this opportunity to thoroughly discuss the particulars of a new guild master. What does everyone think? The same person called out in a carrying voice, and the two founding elders who had chimed in before once again assented. Grover's face was calm, only sitting there and continuously looking around the four corners of the room, with his gaze pausing a bit longer on Phoebe and Andrew. Of course, the position of guild master cannot be empty for too long, but who will be the guild master? This is an important question, a stocky founding elder said in a seat not too far away with a low muffled voice. What else is there to discuss? Grover should be the new guild master, of course. Since the guild master's passing, Grover has been the one to manage the guild's affairs. Everyone has also seen that the guild has been stable and orderly in his hands. I don't think anyone else is qualified to sit in this seat other than Grover. The Grover supporter abruptly stood up and called out, winning the other two people's assent. Grover stood up with a smile, his face full of hypocritical humility as he spoke words that his abilities were limited or that he was embarrassed by undeserved praise. The three were resolute in that it must be him, and the merry band demonstrated quite outstanding partnership. Uncle Andrew, who do you think is more suitable to be the new guild master? At this moment the founding elder who had previously spoken in a low muffled voice looked at Andrew from afar and asked. All the looks from the surrounding founding elders focused on Andrew as if waiting for him to express his decision. Andrew looked in Phoebe's direction, the latter pretending to be calm and composed. He slightly stood up and chuckled lightly. Is not me, at any case I don't have that many days left to live. Hey hey. Everyone displayed friendly smiles after his words. Grover also smiled and laughed softly, like he was heaving a sigh of relief, because he was truly afraid that Andrew would step forward and seize the position of guild master from him. However, Andrew's gaze swept over the assembled and he continued, I think that little Phoebe has grown up. Since she is the daughter of the guild master and a member of the Boost family clan, logically speaking she is the most qualified person to be the new guild master. Why has no one mentioned this? No, absolutely not. Miss Phoebe is too young and has always been traveling outside. She doesn't even know of all the matters within the guild. If she were to become the guild master, she may ruin the business of the guild. The founding elder who had been upholding Grover immediately protested violently. Kiro, that may not be the case. Although Miss Phoebe is young, I see that she's quite knowledgeable and mature. She also knows the proper limits for speech and action when doing something. Perhaps with her at the helm she'll even be able to bring further development to the guild. A founding elder suddenly opened his mouth. All the other elders who had been staying silent without a word suddenly chimed in upon seeing Andrew express his support for Phoebe. 3 or 4 other elders still remained quiet, as if expressing their neutrality. How will this do? We can't take the future of the guild as an experiment for her competency. The loyal Grover supporter called Kiro immediately complained. How can we not? If I recall correctly, when the old guild master first took over the guild he was only 23 himself, but under the guidance of Andrew and a few others the old guild master quickly grew up and helped the guild become more prosperous with every passing day. I believe that Miss Phoebe will also be able to do so. Not to mention, with us aiding her, no major problems will develop as well. The person continued to say. Grover's face had darkened and he'd stopped speaking after Andrew had spoken out. Finally standing up at this time he said to Phoebe, goodness, your boyfriend was once an errand boy for the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force and had the status of a slave. Don't think that I'm poking my nose in too many places, but if people found out that the two of you were together it would affect the reputation of our guild. Several of the founding elders shifted their focus toward Han Sha-oh after these words, unable to conceal the contempt and disdain on their faces. Han Sha-oh gave a horrified, startled look, finally understanding that Phoebe's worries weren't without reason. It looked like he had underestimated the power of Grover and Shadow Ghost. Who would have thought that they'd be able to investigate his background with only his first name? It was a good thing that he had spent most of his time in the cemetery of death lately. Otherwise, if he'd stayed at the school, he may have long since been assassinated by highly trained killers. Uncle, what do you mean by this? At this moment, Phoebe suddenly stood up, her charming face cold as she stared at Grover, angrily wanting to throw all decorum to the side. Don't get angry, dear niece. I just wanted to say that your judgment doesn't seem too good. In order to manage the guild, a daring, wise and far-sighted judgment is most important. If you choose even your future husband from the slaves, then I don't think I'm content to let you be guild master. A peaceful smile was still on Grover's face, but the words he said were quite vicious. I think a person who can murder his own brother for profit and continuously send out killers to attempt to harm his own niece is even less worth of the position of guild master. Han Shao also stood up and watched Grover with a cold smile, completely fearless and seemingly unaware of how shocking his words were. Pausing in the astonished gaze of the entire hall, Han Shao said again, please remember that I am a student of the academy now. I no longer have the status of a slave and never will again. Chapter 78, A Blood Battle in the Deep Alleyways. Chapter 78, A Blood Battle in the Deep Alleyways. Shut your mouth. Don't make unfounded accusations. I had such a deep relationship with my elder brother. How could I possibly kill him? Dear niece, I feel so bad for you since you found a boyfriend that doesn't understand the principles of propriety. Grover's face changed drastically as he surged to his feet, slamming his hands down on the tabletop and roared angrily. His expression as usual. Han Shao lightly laughed and glossed over the matter. Everyone already knows this. Phoebe is the guild master's only daughter and should be the candidate most qualified to inherit the position of guild master. If she were to be assassinated, who stands to profit? When was it an outsider's turn to talk about the matters of a boost merchant guild? Phoebe, you should keep this outsider who doesn't know what he's talking about in line. Grover glared viciously at Han Shao as he turned to talk to Phoebe. At this moment, Phoebe had already calmed down from her earlier panic. She'd always maintained a veneer of civility with Grover, but how was she to know that Han Shao would have no qualms whatsoever and stand in sharp opposition from the beginning, almost having a throwdown with Grover, instantaneously throwing all her plans into disarray? She didn't know what to do for the span of a moment. However, just as Han Shao and Grover were denouncing each other, Phoebe's thoughts churned and she felt that Han Shao's actions were clear and decisive. Because of his actions, her attitude would clearly be displayed in front of the founding elders. This would also show the founding elders that she wasn't some weak person who wasn't willing to fight for her position. Except it was the time to measure her gains and losses. Since Han Shao had already so sharply announced his stance, there wasn't a way that Phoebe could salvage the situation even if she wanted to. Immediately after Grover's words had been cut off, she said confidently, indeed, Uncle Grover, I believe that I have the qualifications to be a competent guild master. Although in recent years I have spent my days outside, Father has never given up his tutelage of me. The knowledge I have learned is also relevant to operating the guild. Father has long since arranged all this. I hope you can support me, Uncle, and teach me if I am found lacking in any places. I am confident that I can take good care of the guild. Good niece, your courage is worth complimenting. However, a matter such as this is not child's play. One misstep is enough to doom the guild beyond redemption. Uncle is cowardly and cannot afford to shoulder such responsibility. Since they were laying everything out, Grover no longer hid and concealed his intentions as he spoke with a darkened face. At this moment, Andrew suddenly grasped his cane and tottered to his feet. He spoke in a conciliatory tone. There's no point in arguing further. How about this? Why don't we let little Phoebe try first? If the guild is still expanding smoothly in her hands after 3 months, then let Phoebe be the guild master. If not, Grover will continue to be. What does everyone think? Since Andrew had spoken apart from the 3 founding elders who supported Grover, all the other founding elders expressed their consent. Andrew waited until they all had expressed their opinions before smiling at Grover, saying merrily, since the majority has agreed, let's do this for now. What do you think? As unwilling unwilling as he was, since the majority of the founding elders within the guild had agreed Grover had no way of changing the situation. He could only grit his teeth and say with resignation, since this is the case then let's move according to your wishes. Nodding, Andrew smiled. Then good, I have a few matters to attend to, so I will be taking my leave. Ah, little Phoebe, I haven't seen you in so long. If you have nothing else to do, come to my house for a chat. Sure, I happen to want to ask Grandpa about your experiences in managing the guild. Phoebe smiled faintly and stood up. She put down the wine glass, threw a look at Han Shao and walked out without even looking at Grover. Han Shao put down his wine glass and flashed a contemptuous cold smile at Grover, who was staring at him frostily. He followed behind Phoebe and headed outside the hall. After leaving the guild, Phoebe looked around and saw that it was empty. She said softly to Han Shao, go back to my residence first. I'll rush back after chatting with Grandpa and Drew. We'll talk later. Hey little Phoebe, your boyfriend is quite bold. He dared to argue with Grover in the hall. I think you have quite the eye. Andrew stood on the side of his carriage as he looked benevolently upon Phoebe and Han Shao. Her charming face blushing red, Phoebe looked at Han Shao and whispered, be careful. She then walked to Andrew and said cutely, no way. You don't know how frustrating it is because he's so pudding-headed sometimes. Han Shao didn't listen further to their conversation any longer and didn't take the carriage that he had arrived in with Phoebe, but rather set out for the northern part of the city alone. Since it was late at night anyways, there were almost no pedestrians on the road. When Han Shao had just left the Boost Merchant Guild, he didn't feel that he was in too much danger, but when he threaded past a street and just walked into an alleyway, he suddenly became alert. His thoughts moved as 3 original demons were soundlessly released from the back of his neck. When the original demons left Han Shao's neck, they immediately assumed the form of nothingness and lay in wait in 3 different directions without leaving a trace behind in the darkness. As if he'd gained additional pairs of eyes, Han Shao could clearly see not only the direction in front of him but even the area behind and to the left and right of him. Refined by magical yuan, there wasn't the slightest bit of fighting aura or magic pulse from the original demons. Under the status of nothingness, it was quite difficult for the human eye to detect any trace of them. Thus, the departure and concealment of the original demons didn't startle anyone. The wind adept Mage Alice, whom Han Shao had seen last time, was floating like a wispy ghost behind Han Shao. He hung soundlessly waiting. 4 killers clad in black clothes and head coverings were also on the roofs of the houses on either side of the alleyway. They walked on soundlessly, quietly following behind him and slowly closing in on him. Startled, Han Shao hadn't thought that Grover would be so daring. He had just left the guild when the latter made his move. It looked like Grover's hatred for him was bone deep. Han Shao suddenly calmed down when it came to the moment of his survival. There were 5 in total. Apart from the wind adept Mage Alice, the other 4 weren't that weak either. According to the observations of the original demons, Han Shao discovered that the 4 of them were divided into 2 warriors, 1 mage and 1 archer. If it wasn't for the fact that the original demons could monitor their movements at any time, Han Shao would be hard-pressed to escape his death. However, with the addition of the original demons, although Han Shao still didn't have any advantages, he wasn't without the hope of escaping. From Phoebe's descriptions, Han Shao knew that there was a mansion up ahead that was the residence of the Empire soldiers stationed here. Han Shao had chosen to walk through this gloomy alleyway precisely because of the manor that lay before him. His thoughts churning madly, Han Shao understood that these people could only make their move within the alleyway. Otherwise, once he made it through, they would lose their chance. The space ring lit up faintly as Han Shao clasped the dagger in his right hand. His footsteps moved forward at a measured pace, neither too slow nor too fast, as he continuously paid attention to the movements of the enemy through the observations of the original demons. Finally, when Han Shao made it to the center of the alleyway, the 5 killers, including Ellis, seemed to believe that this was a good chance, as their approach speed suddenly picked up. An exceedingly light sound of an arrow whistling through the air suddenly fell into Han Shao's hearing range. The arrow was uncommonly sharp as it made straight for Han Shao, its momentum exceedingly fierce. This arrow had come from a professional archer. The angle and tip were exceedingly brutal. If it hadn't been for the fact that Han Shao had clearly observed his actions through the original's demons, then it was very likely that he would have fallen to the arrow on the spot. His originally measured paces suddenly picked up, but he didn't rush forward but rather dodged to the left. The arrow shot past the corners of Han Shao-Oh's clothes with a whooshing sound, whistling violently towards the front. The arrow suddenly fractured into pieces in front of Han Shao as Ellis had long since released a few sharpened blades. He seemed to be waiting for Han Shao to subconsciously move further in, but Han Shao had already detected this and evaded them. At the same time, the arrow above his head suddenly lit up as a patch of firewall abruptly formed and came down over his head. Two nimble figures wielding long swords came flying down from the roofs. Han Shao could clearly see the pale green and dark green fighting auras thanks to the light provided by the firewalls. Abruptly increasing his speed, Han Shao's speed suddenly raised instantaneously and circled to the left, avoiding the obstruction of Alice wind blades and dashing out of the entrance of the alleyway. Han Shao had just left his position when the firewall slammed down and sparks flew up from the place he had just been standing. No matter how they imagined things, they would never know that Han Shao had already clearly seen their intentionally concealed tracks through the eyes of the original demons. They had thought it was absolutely an unexpected attack, but it had already been completely observed by Han Shao. This is what caused the extraordinarily talented group of 5 to fail their first wave of attacks completely. "Don't let him leave the alleyway alive." Ella's soft voice was purposefully sharp and hard as it sounded at this moment. The archer and fire mage stood on either side on the rooftops of the alleyway. When Ella's words were spoken, they made their move at almost the same time. The archer grabbed 3 arrows and notched them to his bow, shooting them all at the same time with a whistling sound. They flew fiercely towards Han Shao's forehead, back and thigh. Another wall of flames suddenly formed in the direction that Han Shao was dashing in, blocking off his escape and forcing him to take the long way around. Otherwise he would be hard-pressed to escape the funeral pyre of the flaming walls. The 2 swordsmen who had just landed took advantage of the situation to quickly approach with their long swords. They were only 10 or so meters away from Han Shao. Ella's feet hovered above the ground as he quickly closed the distance from behind, obviously planning on keeping Han Shao here. Tilting his body, Han Shao once again changed directions and made for the right. He planned on circling past the firewalls and rush out onto the street. Several wind blades came whistling in, but it was all within Han Shao's expectations. The dagger in his hand moved swiftly as he cut away at 5 wind blades. However, 3 of them still drew across his thigh and arms. Him suffering 3 hits was under the circumstances of Han Shao knowing that Ellis had sent wind blades there earlier. Otherwise, if 10 wind blades connected with his vitals, it would be likely that he would be unable to take another step forward. Han Shao bore up beneath the injuries to his thigh and arms and rushed out from the wind blade ambush, simultaneously evading the firewall and flying arrows dashing to the alley's entrance like lightning. He was about to rush out onto the street. At this moment, an exceedingly ghastly wail cut through the quiet night sky. In the midst of running, Han Shao used the original demons to discover that the archer's bow had been cleaved into 2 and was falling listlessly from the rooftop with blood at the corners of his mouth. Phoebe stood where he had just been standing, a long sword in hand and standing with a proud, majestic-looking air. "Foe, Phoebe, you're a swordswoman." Beneath the head covering, Ellis was so surprised that he forgot to modulate his tone and used his original voice to exclaim in surprise. He didn't talk to the others as his quickly dashing body suddenly halted. He abruptly turned back and escaped towards the back with an even higher speed. Phoebe snorted coldly and didn't bother chasing the escaping Ellis. After all, if a wind mage were to attempt a full-out escape, it would be difficult indeed to catch up to him. The long sword in her hand waving, the majestic-looking Phoebe alighted gently from the roof towards the 2 warriors. It looked like she was planning on taking care of those who were still around. Han Shao was about to rush out of the alleyway at this time and was overjoyed when he saw Phoebe suddenly appear. He swiftly did an about-face and opened his mouth to summon the little skeleton, running quickly towards the 2 warriors himself. The little skeleton wouldn't have been that useful when Han Shao was fleeing for his life previously. With the presence of Phoebe the swordmaster, now Han Shao had turned from the hunted to hunter. The little skeleton could naturally make an appearance to kill enemies. When the bone dagger wielding little skeleton skeleton appeared, it started running quickly under Han Shao-Oh's commands. The 7 bone spurs on its back waved as it shot towards the roof, attempting to finish off the fire mage. The fire mage was shocked, as he had never thought the little skeleton would be able to make use of its momentum to directly vault onto the roof. In his panic, he immediately muttered an incantation as the wildly blazing firewall made an appearance again, blocking the path that the little skeleton would take. However, the little skeleton paid no attention to the obstruction of the firewall and flung himself into it. It walked out with its body reddened from the firewall and arrived in front of the fire mage's dumbfounded expression. The bone dagger in its hand danced as it turned the mage into a beehive. Chapter 79, Breaking Through the Boundary. Chapter 79, Breaking Through the Boundary. There were only 2 swordsmen left, one senior and one journeyman swordsman. Phoebe herself was enough to make the 2 of them unable to escape death. Han Shao turning back merely accelerated their deaths. With a flash of his space ring, Han Shao held a crossbow in his hand and fitted a crossbow bolt into the string. He'd already targeted one of them and shot at the back of the senior swordsman when they abruptly started retreating and wanted to take themselves out of the fight. The senior swordsman who planned on leaving had to turn back in resignation and block the bolt, but in the instant he destroyed the bolt, Phoebe was already standing in front of him. The little skeleton that had stabbed the fire mage to death held a bag in his left hand, jumping down from the roof with a whoosh. After his skeleton wobbled a bit, he was already standing with dagger in hand in front of the other journeyman swordsman. As Han Shao strode over with a cold smile, one of the swordsmen suddenly drew his longsword across his neck and fell down. These are people from Shadow Ghost. If they know that there's no way out for them, they'll choose to end their own lives. Phoebe shook her head, storing the longsword in her hand back into a space ring, and said with a frown. The little skeleton had arrived in front of the 2 corpses at this moment and began to search them with practiced motions. When 2 more bags hung on its left hand, it walked over happily to Han Shao with bone dagger in hand, offering the 3 bags to Han Shao. Caressing the little skeleton's skull with a faint smile, Han Shao took the 3 bags and cursed after one glance. Damn it, 3 poor sods. They only had 10 or so gold coins. Rolling her eyes at him with ill temper, Phoebe didn't search the corpses and directly said to Han Shao, I've never seen someone as greedy as you. Don't bother searching their bodies, you won't discover anything. The people of Shadow Ghost never bring anything important with them when they go out on missions, so forget it, they won't bring any riches to you. Han Shao cursed again when he heard Phoebe's words and chanted an incantation to send the little skeleton back. He then grinned and asked softly, didn't you leave with Andrew? Why did you suddenly return? You were hurt? Phoebe was shocked and immediately rushed to Han Shao. When she saw the blood wounds left by the wind blades on Han Shao's body, she immediately revealed a worried expression. The space ring on her finger lit up and some gauze and medicine appeared in her hands. She didn't shy away as she said softly, don't move. It was rare that Han Shao saw Phoebe display such an expression, and he felt vaguely touched inside. He stood there dumbly, not moving at all, and looked at Phoebe carefully apply medicine to his injury, then using gauze to wrap it all up for him. When Phoebe was finished, she tugged at Han Shao and exhaled lightly. You sure know how to pick a place. 2 manors are on the 2 sides of this alleyway and both families are out. No one's come out even after such a violent fight. It looks like the house hasn't been sold yet. However, we can't stay here for long. Although the security isn't too tight here, the guards will still patrol the area after a while. It'd be better if we leave earlier. Let's go. Han Shao agreed and left with Phoebe, rushing to the northern part of the city. He asked along the way, right, you still haven't told me, why didn't you suddenly come back? Seeing that there was no one around, Phoebe frowned and said in a low voice, Grandpa Andrew told me in the carriage that Grover has been conducting transactions with the barbaric orcs and has actually been selling the Empire's weapons to them. The implications of this matter are huge, and if the Empire knew, they wouldn't let him off easily. Grover must know that if I'm in charge of the guild, he won't be able to cover this up anyone, so he must kill me before I take control of the guild. Otherwise, once this matter is uncovered, as strong as he is, Grover will be hard-pressed to escape from the punishment of the Empire. Once I knew of this matter, I knew that he would try to kill you first. I worried about you, so I left Grandpa Andrew halfway through to come find you. Nodding, Han Shao said, so that's why. No wonder Grover wanted to kill us so quickly. It looks like as soon as you have evidence in hand, Grover will be done for without a doubt. Exactly. Phoebe laughed coldly but then sighed as she thought. However, Ellis has learned of my strength this time. I think Grover will think of a plan and even I will find it difficult to deal with his next assassination attempt. Han Shao knew that his power was limited. If even Phoebe couldn't handle things, then he wouldn't have much effect either. The only thing he could do to help Phoebe was with his perceptive senses towards assassins. He thought for a moment and said, "I'll leave for a bit. I'll come find you when my injuries are healed. Grover is our mutual enemy now. I know what to do." "Alright, but don't go back to the academy no matter what you do. Since Grover knows your identity, you'll face tremendous danger if you stay in the academy the next couple of days," Phoebe mused and said to Han Shao. Nodding his head and understanding, Han Shao told Phoebe to be careful and left alone. The three original demons accompanied him but didn't discover any other disturbances until Han Shao came to the cemeteries behind the academy. After returning to the cemetery of death, Han Shao trained his magic for a bit. A cool feeling wreathed around his injuries as he circulated his magical yuan, and the feeling of pain was greatly reduced. After sleeping for a while, it was already noon of the next day. Since all the materials had been gathered now, Han Shao left the cemetery of death eagerly and headed towards the dwarves' village. He planned on asking the dwarf chief Calvin to forge the demon slayer edge for him. The dwarf village was located in a small mountain valley. There were enormous trees concealing the entrance of the village. If it weren't for the fact that Han Shao had once made a trip here with the dwarves, he would have been hard-pressed to find their place of dwelling. Han Shao was now quite familiar with the route and came to the dwarf village after a while. He threaded past the towering trees, and a dwarf who stood guard with a sharp axe in hand in front of the village immediately called out with a friendly voice, "Oh, good friend, you've come to visit us again." Following behind the dwarf, Han Shao traveled through a small path with shrubs on both sides and finally made it to the dwarf village. Calvin, Bennett and the others had heard the news and were all waiting merrily to welcome Han Shao. Fine wine was quickly served. The dwarves lived in log cabins that they themselves had constructed, with some also living in emptied-out tree hollows. There were only 100 or so dwarves in the village. Women and children were a good half of the numbers, and the warriors who could truly fight numbered not that many. Han Shao had won the true friendship of the dwarves over this period of time. They were very generous toward Han Shao. Whenever he came by, there was always fine wine and meats welcoming him, making him feel quite touched. "Han, how come you have time to stop by?" Calvin said merrily to Han Shao. Taking out the materials that Phoebe had prepared from the space ring, Han Shao handed them over to Calvin, saying, "Elder, these were the materials you requests. There's also enough black metal ore. Will you be able to forge a weapon for me?" Calvin took the materials from Han Shao and looked at them carefully, saying with surprise, "Of course, absolutely. With enough materials to forge a great weapon, this is a happy matter for us. Don't worry, Han, we'll start working on it tomorrow. We'll be able to forge a weapon for you in about a week, and you're sure to be satisfied for it." Han Shao truly breathed a sigh of relief with his guarantee and immediately expressed his genuine thanks to Calvin. The low complaints of some of the female dwarves came from afar. Han Shao's ears were sharp and he involuntarily listened closely to them. "It will be winter soon. We're never guaranteed of food in the big snow, and the chief has drawn from the stores many times to treat the guest. At this rate, how will we survive through the winter? Yes, I've also heard that the damned man-eating monsters have been around lately. It looks like they've come out to plunder and raid in order to make it through winter. If they discover our village, we'll have to move again. When will these days end?" The conversations of the female dwarves were all completely taken in by Han Shao. He was a bit touched. It looked like the lives of the dwarves weren't as good as he thought, but even so they had still taken out the best food to treat him. This made him feel quite guilty. He thought for a moment and sighed lightly, saying to Calvin, "Elder, do you not treat me as a friend?" "Han, why would you say such things? Have we treated you unkindly in some way?" Bennett, who was very kindly disposed towards Han Shao, was the first to exclaim in surprise and looked at him in consternation before Calvin had a chance to open his mouth. Shaking his head, Han Shao sighed. "Why must you worry about food and man-eating monsters but refuse to tell me you're a friend about such matters? This won't do. Since the elder is willing to bring out the winter rations to treat me as your friend, I must do something." "Don't worry, Elder, I'll head for human society and help you solve the matter of winter rations. What else do you need apart from this? I can bring it all to you." "How can we allow this? Although we're friends, we can't trouble you. We too wish to purchase these things in the human society, but there's a long stretch of dark forest between here and human society. Not only are there attacks from magical creatures on the journey, but we may run into adventurers with ill intentions. This is why we're forced to stay here. Han, I know that if you're to purchase those things for us, it will spend quite a bit of your money for sure. We can't trouble you like this. I think we'll work a bit harder and still get through this winter, Calvin said. This matter is thus decided. I will help you think of ways to handle the matter of winter rations and the threat of the man-eating monsters. Just concentrate on forging weapons and leave the rest to me. Han Shao made some internal calculations. There were roughly 100 or so in the entire dwarf village. He would probably have to make a few trips in order to bring the amount of food they needed to the cemetery of death based on how much food the space rink could hold. If he purchased the food from Phoebe, he probably wouldn't need to spend that many gold coins. It was just a convenient favor to do, and Han Shao was naturally happy to do so for the dwarves. Thank you so much. I thank you on behalf of my child and the mothers within the village. A female dwarf suddenly heard Han Shao's guarantee when she brought over fruit, and was a move that she immediately thanked Han Shao with the greatest courtesy of the dwarves. You're dismissed, Calvin admonished, and then also said with gratitude, Han, we only create fine wines and forge weapons. Because we have exceedingly little contact with humans, we don't have that many gold coins. We're willing to make some fine wines and forge some weapons for you in exchange, otherwise I won't be able to accept your good intentions. Although Han Shao didn't lust after their wine and weapons, but he understood that with the dwarves' obstinate tempers they would be unwilling to accept his assistance for no reason at all. He finally accepted after thinking for a while. With the promise of winter rations from Han Shao, all the dwarves were beyond excited. Even Calvin drank heartily with Han Shao, a rare occasion indeed. He had to say that the wine made by the dwarves was truly quite sweet. Even the fine wine that Han Shao had drank last night at the Boost Merchant Guild's banquet couldn't compare. Han Shao was in an excellent mood after ensuring his demon slay reg and drank the night away with the dwarves. However, due to him practicing magic, he had already thoroughly sobered under the use of magical yuan when he left the dwarf village. He maintained a state of high alert as he traveled back to the cemetery of death. Before meditating, Han Shao thought for a bit and decided to once more explore the boundary that had stopped Han Shao from descending down to the lower levels of the cemetery of death. He wanted to see if he could break through that barrier with his current level of mental strength. After using the round green ball to open the passageway, Han Shao focused his mental strength and abruptly burrowed him. A piercing pain immediately filled his mind, but because he was used to the pain inflicted by the round green ball during training, Han Shao held up beneath the onslaught. He circulated his magical yuan to its highest and burrowed downwards. Chapter 80, A Magical Cemetery. Chapter 80, A Magical Cemetery. Han Shao fell onto solid ground, regained his footing and took his bearings. He was in a large laboratory. All sorts of containers and large bones were placed everywhere. Several gloomy lights like green will-o-wisps were placed on the walls on the side, lighting up the interior, making it slightly brighter. There were also a few rooms in the four corners. Han Shao went into each of the rooms and discovered that two of them were filled with all sorts of books having to do with necromancy magic, and included a few books on dark magic as well. The books in here were obviously all very old. There was a lot of dust on them, and the number of books greatly exceeded the number of books in the dark studies section of the library in the academy. Many of them were also books that Han Shao had never heard of. Magical supplies were stored in the other four rooms. Each of the containers were sealed tightly and were filled with colorful liquid, with some holding strange bones and teeth of vicious beasts that sparkled with light. Just as Han Shao was taking measure of his surroundings, the round green ball in his hand suddenly sent out an eye-dazzling flash of green splendor. The light encompassed the entire laboratory as a black shadow like a ghost suddenly materialized in one of the circular magical symbols within the laboratory. My child, when you arrive here and see this mirror image, I will have already returned to dust. If you seek to understand everything about the cemetery of death, then you must pay attention and listen to all that I have to say. The black shadow was a concentrated mass. Whether it was his eyes or the light from the round green ball, Han Shao was unable to see its original form. An unpracticed voice slowly formed each word with a bit of difficulty. Han Shao was shocked and then immediately realized that this was a way that mages left messages, Mirror images. According to the meaning of the words, Han Sha-o hastily focused his concentration and listened to every sentence he was saying. First, you must know that the cemetery of death was the sacred ground of necromancers during my time. It represents the peak of necromancy magic. The cemetery of death can move. When you finally grasp all that is present here, you will find that you own a frightening city. The wispy voice explained ceaselessly. Han Sha-o concentrated and listened to the voice's slow descriptions. When the voice said, "You will still be able to see me on the next level," the black shadow suddenly disappeared as well. Apart from the magic matrix above grounds in the cemetery of death, there were 2 more levels apart from the laboratory and library on this level. In order to fully grasp all the secrets of the cemetery of death, he must travel to the 2 lower levels as well. Han Sha-o had gained this understanding from the black shadow that the cemetery of death was actually a castle that could move, and it was an incredibly powerful castle. This greatly shocked Han Sha-o. The round green ball was equivalent to a key to enter the cemetery of death. The evil mental brand of a necromancer was held within. If an ordinary person obtained this round ball, they would be unable to escape the corruption of the ball and would finally turn into a senseless zombie. Apart from necromancers with the feel of necromancy magic about them, although Han Sha-o was just a magic apprentice, he still had the presence of necromancy magic about him, and thus, thankfully, hadn't been assimilated by the curse. But because he had brashly explored when his mental strength had been too weak, he would have been hard-pressed to escape death that day if it weren't for the help of the magical yuan. The amazing magical yuan was different from all energy of this world. It had actually saved Han Sha-o when his mind was being invaded by the mental strength, and had bafflingly helped Han Sha-o increase his mental strength. Han Sha-o had reaped great rewards in the midst of inhumane pain. This was probably something that the creator of the round green ball had never imagined. From the depictions of the black shadow, Han Sha-o received limited information. It seemed that a more in-depth explanation existed in the lower 2 levels. Han Sha-o mused silently for a bit and then re-entered the rooms that were full of magic books. The magic books were the essence of necromancy magic, the product of a time when necromancy magic was at its peak. These were true priceless treasures to Han Sha-o. The academy already had quite a number of books, but books truly dealing with necromancy magic weren't that many. Most of them only dealt with beginner or journeyman topics, and ones that dealt with more advanced necromancy magic were exceedingly few. He flipped through the books covered with thick dust in the 2 rooms. Han Sha-o had to sigh in admiration. The magical books here were much more superior compared to the ones at the academy, whether in terms of quality or quantity. 3 of them were called necromancy magic, divided into upper, middle, and lower scrolls. They were placed in the most eye-catching place and had obviously received special treatment. They were placed in a magical container and still looked quite new. They probably wouldn't be damaged even in tens of thousands of years. The upper scroll of necromancy magic was already quite thick. Han Sha-o discovered that it recorded in detail everything from the beginning of necromancy magic to the true essence of necromancy magic. The knowledge held within was quite different from what was taught by the academy. Much of the necromancy knowledge and magics recorded were those that Han Sha-o had never heard of. There were handwritten notes on every page, starting from the middle scroll, providing detailed footnotes to the content on the page, but it looked like the 3 scrolls were of one entity. When Han Sha-o read the middle and lower scroll, he still couldn't understand some of the knowledge within, even with the aid of the notes. Han Sha-o could just barely understand the first half of the upper scroll, but unfortunately without the presence of handwritten notes, Han Sha-o still felt it very difficult to understand. Perhaps the person who had prepared this set of magical books had felt that people wouldn't need notes to understand the upper scroll, and that's why he didn't leave any explanations. After thinking for a while, Han Sha-o decided to start with the first scroll. He planned on using this complete set of necromancy magic as his textbooks and slowly study and train from them. After forming his determination, Han Sha-o took the round ball and departed from this level, returning to the surface level. He wasn't affected by the boundary and began to study the scroll, foregoing meals and forgetting to sleep. Han Sha-o was preoccupied with this scroll of necromancy magic for many days in a row, understanding all the words inside by studying every word. From this set of necromancy magic, Han Sha-o understood that the knowledge and spells currently taught at the academy were much more shallow than the explanations in the books. There were many evil magics that Han Sha-o would be unable to learn from Fanny. Corpse reanimation was a basic kind of necromancy magic. It used necromancy magic to turn those who had died into zombies and would start fighting according to the caster's will. If mental strength was sufficient enough, a terrifying zombie army could be reanimated. Canopy of necromancy was another evil magic. As long as Canopy of necromancy was released, the battle strength and agility of dark creatures would be greatly increased beneath the coverage of the canopy, and the enemy would have difficulty adjusting to this area spell, decreasing their battle strength. Numerous spells similar to corpse reanimation and canopy of necromancy were listed within the scroll. It was said that these magics had been lost for a long time and none of the necromancers today could grasp them, but there were detailed descriptions within this scroll of necromancy magic. Han Sha-O understood that he had picked up a precious treasure. If this scroll of necromancy magic was circulated, then it could possibly immediately change the current condition of necromancers, noticeably increasing the level of the necromancer's strength. The terror of necromancers would then once again materialize. He studied for nearly 10 days, either meditating or studying the scroll of necromancy magic. Corpse reanimation was a basic spell, but unfortunately Han Sha-O had no corpses to practice on. Canopy of necromancy was an advanced spell. Han Sha-O was equally unable to practice it because he lacked the mental strength to do so. But through his practice during this time, Han Sha-O mastered the bone spear magic. Even the zombie summoning spell was almost at hand, but he met with some resistance when communicating with the other dimension. After calculating the time, it was about time that the Demon Slayer Edge was complete. Han Sha-O thought for a bit and left the Cemetery of Death with the small skeleton, carefully evading a few level 3 and above magical creatures. He hunted a few low-level monsters and took them with him, once again walking to the dwarves' village. Midway there, just when Han Sha-O was about to enter the dwarves' village, he heard the sound of weapons clashing. Han Sha-O was greatly shocked and picked up his speed, threading through the trees and bushes with the little skeleton and rushing towards the source of the sounds. A couple dozen man-eating monsters and almost 100 goblins were wielding weapons and besieging the dwarves. The dwarves held brand new weapons in their hands and were so much sharper compared to the ones that the man-eating monsters and goblins were using. The goblins in particular were using a few crude blades and wooden sticks, breaking into many pieces whenever they clashed with the dwarves. It was the superiority of their weapons that had enabled the vastly outnumbered dwarves to defend until now. The dwarf village was behind them, not too far away, and women and children with no fighting ability were there. For the safety of the village, they couldn't even retreat into the village in case they exposed the village and endangered the women and children. Han Sha-O took in this scene and immediately became enraged. His crossbow had already appeared in his hand as he ran, and several crossbow bolts broke through the air with a whistling sound, shooting down a man-eating monster and 2 goblins. The little skeleton seemed to sense Han Sha-O's anger from the depths of his heart and flew towards the front. The 7 bone spurs on its back shot in all directions, and lines of blood appeared on the bodies of these man-eating monsters and goblins. After ear-piercing sounds rang out. "Oh, it's Han, he's here!" Bennett, who was hoisting up an iron club and surrounded by 5 or 6 goblins when he suddenly saw Han Sha-O's figure, and exclaimed in surprise. Like a wolf entering a herd of sheep, the arrival of Han Sha-O and the little skeleton immediately heralded a slaughter. The little skeleton was particularly fierce. Its 7 bone spurs danced amongst the crowd of man-eating monsters and goblins, causing injuries and fatalities to them. After Han Sha-O had arrived, he first summoned a few skeletal warriors, and they all wielded bone daggers as they dashed towards these villains. Han Sha-O himself rather held his ground and targeted the man-eating monster and goblins who had died, beginning to release the spell of corpse reanimation. After failing a few times, Han Sha-O still continued to remain where he stood and repeatedly chanted the incantation under the surprised looks of the dwarves, attempting to make the bodies who had just lost their lives rise again. Finally, an ugly goblin with a crossbow bolt still sticking out of its chest suddenly stood up after Han Sha-O cast his spell. It grabbed a metal club and tottered over, starting to attack the goblin next to him that was still alive. With 1 success under his belt, Han Sha-O calmly recalled the steps he had just taken when casting, and once again cast a corpse reanimation spell. He succeeded once again. It was a man-eating monster this time. Under the release of Han Sha-O's corpse reanimation spell, another 5 or 6 man-eating monsters and goblins stood up, raising their weapons in accordance with Han Sha-O's commands and starting to attack the living man-eating monsters and goblins. When the man-eating monsters and goblins discovered this phenomenon, phenomenon. This immediately caused a strong wave of terror and panic to spread amongst them. These man-eating monsters and goblins were shocked out of their wits seeing their dead companions stand up vacantly and attack them. Saying a few sentences in their own language and pointing at Han Shao in fright, all of them scattered like the four winds as they fled for their lives. Even the dwarves on the side felt a bit of fear. They all looked at Han Shao with exceedingly odd looks different from those they looked at him usually. Han Shao blinked and then immediately reacted. He dissolved his spell and the dead man-eating monsters and goblins fell down once again. Han, this magic of yours is too evil. Even we are a bit afraid. Binan walked toward Han Shao and spoke haltingly. Han Shao knew that the spell of corpse reanimation was indeed quite evil and ordinary people would be unable to accept it. He thought for a moment and nodded, saying, Bennett, I understand what you mean, but I've done so in order to save all of you. We understand, thank you, Han. However, this kind of magic is truly hard to accept. Even the villainous man-eating monsters and goblins were scared witless by you. Hey, let's go. Your weapon is ready and we'll give it to you when we arrive at the village. You guys have finished it. Han Shao was truly astonished upon hearing that the Demon Slayer Edge was ready. He brought up the rear and walked towards the dwarf village. The little skeleton's 7 bone spurs reattached to its spine and didn't head for the dwarf village along with Han Shao. Rather, it followed Han Shao's orders and looted the bodies of the dead with a practiced hair. Following Calvin, Han Shao came to the dwarf village and arrived at the site where the Demon Slayer Edge was crafted. Han, this is the weapon that we've forged according to your requirements. Are you satisfied with it? Bennett pointed with the hammer in his hand at a weapon on the side as he spoke to Han Shao. The Demon Slayer Edge was 2 feet long and a cold light sparkled along its keen edge. The body was dark brown with 3 raised thorns at the spiky tip. It was heavy in his hand. Han Shao held the Demon Slayer Edge and carefully observed it suddenly stabbing the whetstone beneath it. The Demon Slayer Edge sank into the whetstone. Nodding, Han Shao looked at the somewhat uneasy Calvin in satisfaction. He smiled. Elder, thank you for your crafting. I really like this weapon. Hey, as long as you like it. This weapon has black iron and black gold mixed in as well as more than 10 rare metals. I'm you also very satisfied with this weapon. Calvin breathed a sigh of relief and looked at the Demon Slayer Edge as he spoke. Be on the alert, man-eating monster and goblins may appear again during this period of time. I will leave for a while and will bring your winter rations with me next time I visit. Make sure to take care. After reminding these dwarves, Han Shao eagerly returned to the cemetery of death, circulating the magic within his body. He used the essence of his blood as a circuit to the Demon Slayer Edge, refining the weapon for the next 3 days and 3 nights according to the memories left behind by Chu Kanglan. Han Shao's blood was intermixed with magical yuan as it slowly flowed into the Demon Slayer Edge. After 3 days, Han Shao was drained and worn out and felt that his magical yuan was running dry. The originally dark brown Demon Slayer Edge had turned dark red. After Han Shao's magical yuan recovered over the next couple of days, he started practicing the law of activating magic with the Demon Slayer Edge, attempting to manipulate the weapon with his mind. During this process, the meridians of Han Shao's body would occasionally swell painfully. Han Shao still gritted his teeth against the enormous impact of the waterfall on this day, continuously using magical yuan to refine the meridians in his body. He suddenly sank into a mental state. Under unbeknownst circumstances, Han Shao slowly woke up. He discovered that at some unknown time he had already fallen into the deep pool. When he emerged from the frigid waters of the deep pool, he suddenly discovered that the Demon Slayer Edge had disappeared. Startled, he wanted to quickly find the Demon Slayer Edge again. At this moment, a dark red light suddenly shot out from the waters and flew towards Han Shao. Han Shao had thought danger had found him and was planning on evading it when he realized that a bizarre feeling had risen in his heart. It was as if the dark red light shooting towards him had some sort of connection to him. He first blinked and then a thought flashed through his mind. Suddenly enlightened, Han Shao's thoughts moved. The dark red light shooting towards him suddenly started dancing in midair. Han Shao then sensed a fish in the waters of the pool and a thought bubbled up in his mind. The fish was instantaneously pierced through by the Demon Slayer Edge. It looks like I've succeeded. Han Shao's left hand reached out and the Demon Slayer Edge shot out from the waters, landing in Han Shao's palm. Circulating his magical yuan, the speed of the mystical glacial spellfire was many times faster than usual. Han Shao was shocked again and then suddenly discovered that traces of frosty air was leaking out from the Demon demon Slayer Reg held in his left hand with the mystical glacial air being infused into it. Because the demon Slayer Reg was pointed at the deep pool, a layer of ice had already formed on the surface of the pool as the waters gave off frigid air. He knew that these were the signs of having broken through the open passages and reaching the molded spirit realm. Han Sha-O was gratified to know that after a few life and death struggles and several sleepless nights of magic training, he had finally once again achieved a breakthrough. Han Sha-O's magic had once again improved now, and a most excellent demon Slayer Reg was now in his hands. Han Sha-O felt that it was time to leave the cemetery of death and thoroughly eliminate the threat known as Grover. Walking out from the tombs in the mountains behind the academy, Han Sha-O didn't immediately find Phoebe. Han Sha-O harbored feelings of affection towards Fanny. He had planned on asking her a few questions on magical knowledge after their last meeting, but it was a pity that he had received the black gold ore from Phoebe and had eagerly returned to the cemetery of death. The upper scroll of necromancy magic contained much knowledge that Han Sha-O did not fully understand. This scroll didn't have many notes. As an adept mage, Fanny was bound to have a more in-depth understanding. Therefore Han Sha-O had long since noted the topics he didn't understand and wanted to find a chance to ask Fanny again. The Babylon Academy of Magic and Force had an exalted position within the Empire. Although Grover hated Han Sha-O's guts, he wouldn't dare brazenly make a move against Han Sha-O on school grounds. The teachers of various majors were all quite strong. Apart from the necromancy major, the other majors had even more stronger characters acting as overseers. Even if the killers of Shadow Ghost came looking for him, it was impossible for them to leave alive once they had been discovered. It was now dusk and the students were now relaxing or eating meals after a day of learning. Han Sha-O didn't directly go look for Fanny at her lab, afraid that this would attract the attention of others. He waited a while until the sky had completely darkened before walking to the small building that Fanny lived in without anyone knowing. Han Sha-O had stayed in the necromancy major for so long and had long since learned of where Fanny lived because of his feelings for her. He skillfully deciphered the appropriate direction under the cover of the night, walking to the teacher dormitory building in which Fanny resided.